The Vestal virgins were priestesses of the ancient Roman goddess named Vesta. Their job was to keep Vesta's sacred flame burning in the goddess's temple. In exchange for their years of temple service, Vestal virgins lived lives of luxury and privilege. I'm Deborah May McLeod, an author of historical fiction on ancient Rome, and particularly on the priestesses of Vesta. There were some exceptional benefits that came with this religious role, but there were also some downsides to being a Vestal virgin, and that's what we're going to look at here. No sex life. Girls were taken into the Vestal order between the ages of 6 and 10 years old, and at that time they took a 30-year vow of chastity. That meant that they would remain virgins during those years that most older girls and young women were getting married. But it wasn't just being denied the pleasures of the marriage bed, it was being denied the companionship of a husband and a partner in life during their youth. Now, upon retirement, typically in their mid to late 30s, a retired priestess could certainly make up for lost time, especially since she had the freedom to choose her own bedmate or husband, but it wouldn't change the fact that some Vestals undoubtedly felt lonely and deprived of sex, of domestic life, and even motherhood during their 20s and most or all of their 30s. A lot of pressure. The sacred fire of Vesta that burned in the temple, it was an eternal flame. It had to stay burning all the time, day and night. In fact, the ancient Romans believed that if Vesta's fire went out, or if the rites in the temple weren't performed properly, Rome would lose the favor and protection of the gods. And that could lead to all kinds of calamities: plague, famine, military defeat, even invasion. That put a lot of pressure on a Vestal priestess, not just to keep the fire going, but to keep the goddess happy. The prayers and rituals had to be done flawlessly. One misspoken prayer, one misplaced strip of oak, and tragedy could strike, and it would be all your fault. Being used as a scapegoat or pawn. The Temple of Vesta was a very sacred place, with the exception of the Vestalia, which was a festival to the goddess where Roman women were allowed to enter the sanctum. Only the Vestal priestesses were permitted inside. They kept the fire going, and they performed the rites and the prayers to Vesta in secret. And, unfortunately, that could lead to unfounded accusations. It was all too easy for a defeated general to say, well, I only lost the battle because Priestess Licinia let the fire go out, or I only lost because Pomponia has a forbidden lover. And it wasn't just defeated generals that a Vestal had to worry about. While most emperors were generous and benevolent to the Vestal order, some, like Domitian, were much less so. And the worst part was, because so much of what the Vestals did was done behind closed doors, it was hard for a Vestal to disprove these kind of accusations. Temptation. A Vestal virgin was bound by her vow of chastity from childhood to her mid to late 30s, through adolescence, through young womanhood, to later womanhood. And while there were various concoctions the Vestals used to quell desire, that's still a lot of time to suppress not just sexual desire, but romantic interest. You can imagine how difficult it would have been to have your eye on a handsome young merchant or chariot driver, and maybe even develop a friendship with this man, only to have him tire of waiting for you and marry someone else. The temptation to succumb to sexual desire or to cling to a forbidden romance, it must have struck many priestesses, even if a relatively few actually went through with it. Going on trial. A Vestal virgin who broke her vow of chastity or neglected her duties, or who was falsely accused of doing these things, she would effectively be put on trial. Now, the way these trials were conducted and how fair they were, that depended on the time and the people involved. Nonetheless, this ancient Roman coin from the 1st century BCE, it depicts in cold metal the trial of a Vestal virgin. You can see the Temple of Vesta, and inside you could see a chair. Now, that isn't just any old chair, it's called a curule chair, and it is quite literally a seat of power. Only men who held certain political powers could sit in it. So, it represents the authority of the state, and it's basically the seat of a judge here. You'll see on the right side of the coin a little tablet of sorts, and on it the letters A and C. These stand for absolve or condemn. The Latin words are very close to the English here, obviously. So, the men who are participating in this trial, they're going to ultimately vote on the Vestal's guilt or innocence. If they think she's innocent, they're going to mark A and deposit the tablet in a voting urn, like the one that you can see on the left side of the coin. If they think she's guilty, they're going to mark C for condemn, and then the judge will tally the votes. And the Vestal, she'll either go home and try to put the whole thing behind her, or she'll have to suffer the punishment. Which brings us to the last and definitely the biggest downside of being a Vestal virgin. The punishment for breaking your vow of chastity or failing in your duty to properly care for Vesta's sacred flame. Being buried alive. A condemned Vestal virgin faced a truly terrible fate. First, she would be whipped by the chief priest. After that, she would be gagged and transported through the city, perhaps even in a box, to an area near the Colline Gate. This area was called the Campus Scleratus in Latin, which translates to the evil field, and it's just as awful as it sounds. Here, deep in the ground below the evil field, there was a subterranean chamber. The mouth of this chamber was opened, the Vestal was led to the edge of it, and a ladder was then extended down into the dark depths. The priestess was then forced to descend, rung by rung, to the bottom. When she reached the bottom, the ladder was pulled up and the chamber was sealed, sealing the Vestal's fate along with it. Now, how long a Vestal survived in that chamber? She might have lived for many days. Even if she was sent down with a little food, a little water and light, those wouldn't have lasted very long. She might have slowly starved, died of thirst, or suffocated. Or perhaps the end came quicker. People are people, and the Vestals had many friends in Rome. Perhaps a sympathetic priest managed to send something down with her, some kind of poison maybe even a knife. So, as not to end on a dark note, I can assure you that over the long history of the Vestal Order, only a relative few suffered this awful fate. Indeed, being a priestess of Vesta came with many privileges, and if you want to learn about them, you can watch my video on the pros of being a Vestal virgin, because I promise it's much cheerier than this one.